Hi, I'm Brian Lord, Senior Vice President of Premier Speakers Bureau. I'm happy to have on Dave Scott, six-time Hawaiian Ironman World Champion, speaker, and now coach of Ironman champions. Dave, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, one of the things that, with the Ironman, it's this incredibly grueling race, 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and then a 26.2-mile marathon. What are the parallels that you see between what you do and what you've done with the endurance needed to compete in the corporate world?
Well, there's a lot of synergy, obviously, with both, and the corporate world has lots of different handles and different sectors. If you're at the top of the corporate world, and I'll maybe talk about this in a second, a lot of the best of the best have internal fears, and when I coached the top champions, it really wasn't this innate, I'm going to override everything. It was this fear of success and fear of failure, and it's a real fine pinnacle. They go to the top. But when I kind of look at the corporate world and athletes that I coach, I always tell them to develop what I call intrinsic strength, that internal strength. And it's really easy to go through life and really not recognize your strengths, your inherent gifts that you have. We sort of take them for granted, and certainly your peers recognize that, your families, your supporters. But internally, you've got to be able to bring that up. And the second part of it is when we look at focusing, I always tell my athletes, focus on the action. You may fail. You may fail, and it may be short term, but focus on what you're doing. Don't be pulled away by someone else. And in the corporate world, it's very easy to say, oh, you need to do this because that's our mantra, this is our objective of the company. But really, what makes people motivated is what they pull in intrinsically.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you find that first time when you were attempting your first Ironman? Where did you find that sort of internal what you're saying, sort of that fortitude that you have to come up with?
Well, way back when I did my first Ironman race, it was 1980, and it was at the inception of the sport, and we were all very, very green. But I remember I had an interview from Jim Lampley at ABC Wide World of Sports, and he said, "How do you think you're going to do in this race?" And that last word was the key. I said, "I'm going to race this." And I had no idea what my competitors were capable of doing. I just said, I'm going to race this. And he said, well, it's a really long day. And I said, I've actually looked at it on paper. It is quite long. But my objective was to break it down into pieces. And I think when we look at sport and we also look at the business sector, the enormity of the task sometimes isn't palatable. It's not tangible. And in an Ironman race, if you break it down into pieces, it goes by very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did way back in 80, and I've kind of followed that, through the years.
Yeah. Now, talking about, racing something as opposed to just doing it, that sort of spirit of competition. What, you've worked with these great athletes and great people, and obviously I know that you do coaching outside of that. What do you find is the common theme among the best competitors?
Well, the best competitors, ironically, are not necessarily the ones that have this stoic guild around them where they've built up this fortress and they can override anything. That's really false. I've noticed even with the best athletes, world champion Craig Alexander and Chrissy Wellington, that if they're not emotionally, mentally, and physically in tune, that wall is going to crumble. And really the world's best, and also in business, when you're successful, everyone gives you adulation. Oh, you're tremendous, you're phenomenal, you're invincible. But internally, they have this huge fear, and the fear that most of the champions have, and in success in business, very big parallel, is that it's the fear of success or fear of failure. And they climb up this pinnacle, and they're only as good as their last training day or their last race, and then they fall off the backside. It's not fear of disappointment where you take a beginner, or fear of commitment, or fear of the unknown. Those are tangible fears. But for the super athletes, the super business people, it's really what they feel internally and how do they override that. And my task as a coach, and certainly when I was competing, was to recognize that I had a small set of skills, and they were very, very good. They were very, very good. And one of the things that I did, and I actually encourage folks when I speak to them, is actually to write these down. What are your skills? What are your skill set? And some people say, I interact well with people. I'm fairly forthright. I have a lot of faith within myself. there may be something tangible, and all of a sudden they recognize some of these things that have been buried for a long time. So I try to bring that out and draw parallels with the world's best.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you actually do that? I mean, one of the things is fascinating about you and what you've done is staying at such a high level with such tough competition. You know, a lot of people I know are familiar with you and sort of the battles with, with Mark Allen. You know, for people who are basketball fans, you know, you sort of think Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. Do you think competition helps you or hurts you in, you know, sort of improving your skill sets and what you do?
Well, I think competition really brings out the best, and there's no one in business that would say, gee, I just want to be complacent and slide this with a mediocrity level of intent, and, you know, who cares? I mean, I tell my 15-year-old daughter this. I said, you know, be passionate about what you're doing, and be passionate so that you don't have this level of mediocrity. And I mentioned a word just a minute ago. If you have faith within yourself, and I tell all my top athletes and the business sector that faith breeds the highest probability of success. Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking about always upping your standard mm-hmm. and putting yourself in front of other people where you challenge yourself and you have an inherent risk in what you're doing, usually you're able to override it. Now, I love the competition. I knew I was a marked guy when I went to Kona every year. And I was kind of like the honeybee in the water. Well, there's Dave Scott. Let's glom around him at the start of the swim. And my tactic was really to go out as hard as I could and to dictate the pace. I wanted my competition to worry about me. I didn't want to think about them. So I relished the opportunity to be in the lead, and that was my tactic. It worked most of the time.
Yeah. One of the questions that we have coming in from Twitter here, how do you get yourself out of bed and motivated and focused every day, especially when you don't want to?
Well, I'm an old stallion, Brian. I've been doing this for a long time now, and people always ask me this question. You know, how do you have the passion for what you're doing? And to me, it's still a game. I still play the game. I get in the pool and I swim with some of the world's best, some of the athletes that I coach, and I can't stay with them for the life of me. But I don't want them to lap me. I want to stay on the interval. And so I've always said that when you play the mental and emotional game, you always heighten your performance. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've done it for a long time. I've been in triathlon for 35 years, and I still like to swim, bike, run. I have other interests above and beyond those three things. Uh-huh. But, I still have a passion for doing it. I kind of have a steadfast rule when people look at sort of elevating their health. And even on the days where you don't feel motivated, you don't have time, you're overcommitted, you've got things going on at home, at work, I have a 20-minute rule. I said, exercise for 20 minutes, and generally you get that little morphine-like effect where you get those endorphins released and you feel better. Mm-hmm. And so when people say, gee, I'm so busy with my job, I don't buy it. Mm-hmm. I don't buy it.
Now, what are the tools and takeaways audiences have after hearing you speak?
Well, I usually come up with a list. It kind of has varied over the year, and certainly depends on the audience and who I'm speaking to. But I mentioned a few of them. I've had a great opportunity of also listening to really good speakers. And one of the things that I have kind of taken away, you know, people talk about a vision or a plan. And I look at that and think, you know, I don't really buy that. Mm-hmm. I want people to have a plan, but I want them to act on it. Mm-hmm. I want them to act on it. And I've always told athletes and people in business, if you fail, you cannot come back and punch yourself and say, you know what, I didn't try. But if you never take that step out there, so have a plan, but be forthright with it. And I'll be very specific. I talk about goals. Mm-hmm. And goals are very short term for me. I like to set them 10 to 14 days. And they're tangible for an athlete. They're tangible for people in business. The second thing is to take a risk at what you're doing. I don't mean jumping off the cliff. Risks have to be tangible, but they make you hungry. And for an athlete and people in business, if you're not mentally challenged or emotionally challenged, and you're not able to kind of step out of that mold, and maybe it's the company that says, oh, this is your mold, but you're not able to take that step out, you're going to rot. You're going to rot. Mm-hmm. And I've told my athletes this many, many times, when you're on, turn on that engine a little bit. Challenge yourself just a little bit more. Third one I mentioned is having faith within yourself. That's a huge one. The fourth one, which I've really noticed, particularly at the top level of performance, the best athletes, the champions, and in business the same thing, the people that have seemingly the greatest amount of pressure, one of the things that I've always found that alleviates pressure is to have a lightness or levity or a sense of humor. And if you can look at that during your day and you can lighten that stress that you have, because stress can be very, very positive. But if you let it overwhelm you, it becomes cumbersome, burdensome. So I always tell people to have a sense of humor. And even in the close races that I raced, I'd always see something that, with an audience. We saw a guy that was totally inebriated in this great race that I had with Mark Gallen, and he was on the beachfront property and had a whole can of beers around him. And I thought, gee, I wonder if he even knows the race is going on today. He finished the bike 112 miles and came out on the run, and this guy was ready for us. I mean, he jumped up and ran right out in the middle of the road, and Mark and I were shoulder to shoulder, and people saying, this is the greatest battle ever. And I'm thinking about this guy over here. What's he going to do? Anyway, he got right next to us, and right at the very last minute where the police were coming down, they were ready to shackle him, he said, come on, you guys, pick it up. I just thought, it was a funny thing that kind of happened during that race, but I think having a sense of humor is really huge. Next on my list is to be passionate about what you're doing, and I mentioned that. I feel that everyone has an obligation to be the best that they can be, and when you're passionate, that brings up that hunger level, and you perform well, and that's a really big item on my list. Lastly, I met with a sports psychologist way back in '94. I raced in '89, had a 5-year hiatus, and I came back in '94 when I was 40 and got second. And my life seemed to be cluttered. I had 2 kids at the time, 2 young boys, and he told me one phrase, and I've kind of shared this with all the groups I speak to. He said, "Do what you can do at the moment. Do what you can do at the moment, and don't look ahead." And it's something that I internally held within myself, but I had to be reminded of it, and it's been a great reminder ever since then. And ironically, I actually got an email today from an individual that I spoke to, and he said, "I always remember that phrase." And I got another email from UBS. I spoke to them the other night in Phoenix, and there was several people that commented that I really liked your list of things, and I certainly remember your phrase, the one I just recited. So that's my takeaway.
One of the things we're really big at here at Premier is making event planners look good and making their lives easier. How do you do those things?
Well, I'm very nervous about working with an event planner because I want to make sure that I'm fit in to their business, and I'm really the guy. And I always sort of preface it, Judge, I don't know if I'm really the guy to speak to your group. And maybe that's sort of a negative way to approach it. I could say, gee, absolutely I'm the best guy. But I need to know the profile of the personnel that I'm speaking to. I need to know the backgrounds of the individuals. I like to know little things because quite often in the conversations that I have, and typically I'll have 2 or 3 conversations with the event planner prior to the event, so they're very comfortable. I usually send them kind of an outline of what I'm going to talk about, and they have a kind of a good pulse on me. I'm sort of wild and abstract and have a sense of humor. Hopefully that's a good thing. But I think with the event planners, being in contact with them, and I usually bring up something about senior vice president, the CEO, and I have no qualms about giving them a little bit of a dig because everyone out in the audience wants to do it, but they're all contained. Well, I'm just a speaker for one day, and usually I have that opportunity. So hopefully that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, for the event planners and folks watching this, if you'd like to learn more, check out Dave's bio and fees and information if you look here at the bottom of the screen. And then also make sure to subscribe to this channel so you can see more great interviews. So Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to do this and for sharing your story and all these great tips.
Yeah, my pleasure, Brian. Nice chatting with you.
Thank you.